one of the glaring contradictions of tech libertarianism, or I think has morphed into tech fascism, is that so many of these guys hate government and seek to dismantle it, yet most of their fortunes are built upon public infrastructure and government contracts and subsidies.
The way they're all kowtowing to Trump now, I don't even know how much of them really like what Trump is doing or believe what he's doing. They just don't want to mess with the shareholder thing. That's it. They're just being amoral, I would say, rather than immoral.
Hi everyone, JJ here. Welcome back to the Johnston Lounge. Now I want to highlight this video today. I'm going to react to some of it. I encourage you to go and see the full interview and Gil Duran's channel, the Nerd Reich. I have talked about it before, not for quite a while. Now this interview has been doing the rounds. It's a popular video and for good reason. So let's go. I'm going to react to it, starting to talk about tech fascism and what these tech billionaires have been doing, which is pretty close to what I have been doing in quite a few of my videos. So let's get into it. Here's Gil.
Tech fascism is here, and it's growing. Elon Musk is using X as a propaganda machine for far-right movements worldwide. Peter Thiel openly speaks of his disdain for democracy, and tech billionaires are building surveillance and military machinery for an authoritarian state, all to bolster the fascist regime of Donald Trump. Tech fascism didn't emerge quietly. It grew openly, in plain sight. So why did tech critics in journalism fail to warn us about it? For one thing, they were too busy licking the boots of tech billionaire CEOs. But there were a few exceptions, like today's guest, Paulina Borsook. Back in the 1990s, most tech journalists were worshipping Silicon Valley, but Borsook did the opposite. Writing for Wired magazine and other publications, Borsook warned of a new toxic techno-libertarian political strain, one informed by the absolutist worldview of Ayn Rand, a new wave that sought to create a world as controllable and predictable as a computer, one with no room for the messy reality of human needs. In 2001, Borsook published Cyber Selfish, a critical romp through the terribly libertarian world of high-tech. The book skewered high-tech culture with a scathing analysis, and it revealed the childish political beliefs and toxic masculinity at its core. She predicted that if these tech figures ever took an interest in politics, it would be bad news for the world. Spoiler alert, that's exactly what happened. Years before tech figures like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel would rise to challenge democracy, Paulina Borsook saw it coming. But the media gatekeepers, they weren't interested in any bad news about their access to power and their advertising dollars. Her book wasn't a bestseller at the time, and her writing career took a dive. Today, however, Borsook's work is back in the spotlight because she was right. A new generation is discovering her sharp and prophetic work.
Okay, so there's a lot in there. That was a great intro going into this interview and the author that he's talking about, but also a lot of what else he's been doing on that channel. And as I said, it's similar to some of the things I've been doing, highlighting Elon Musk and what he's been doing over the past couple of years. I've also talked about Peter Thiel and others, but Gil's gone deep. He's a journalist, a writer. He's got a book coming out as well. So let's get into this interview. Honestly, that was a good roundup of quite a lot of what he's been talking about for quite a long time. If you're not up with that yet, you'll get a good idea from this as well.
In the 1990s, when many other journalists were sucking up to tech and helping to build this cult of worship around tech CEOs and founders, you took a very different approach, and you tore into them with a scathing critique. You described a culture of antisocial, anti-government men with massive egos and superiority complexes, and you warned that this could pose a problem for the rest of us one day. And, unfortunately, you turned out to be right.
But it put me at the beginning of all this stuff. You know, I always say I went to the press conference Bill Gates had in 1984 introducing Windows. I went to the first conference on the coming commercialization of the internet. I was always looking at the people. What were they saying? How did they think? Why did they make that strange remark? I think that was part of what led me to pay attention to this strange undertone I was noticing everywhere because I was paying attention to the people, not just what did the latest Wonder Widget do.
Okay, so she picked up on it really early on. This was in the 1990s. She was in Silicon Valley, writing for Wired, being a journalist. But a lot of people did not pick up on what she has. And of course, in hindsight, it becomes clear. We've seen these tech billionaires, as they are now, actually going into politics, trying to control government in different ways. We've seen Elon Musk going into Doge. I mean, I documented that in my videos as it was happening and being critical of all that happening. And as they say here, these seem like quite angry men, even though they're so rich. And the philosophy behind that is interesting. And Gil's been tracking that. And this forgotten book, which looks like it's going to get republished, hopefully as an audiobook too, because I think people do need to hear what she was saying way back then that has actually started to play out, or more than started. I mean, it's quite far along, isn't it, really, with what's happening with the Trump regime. And as she said, rather than supporting Trump, they can just see an opportunity. We see Peter Thiel, who backed J.D. Vance. We see Elon Musk that basically paid off Trump, right? $275 million or more. And he got to really do what he wanted for a few months there and really just crashing in, doing what he wants. And as Gil said, these people have massive government contracts. They hate government, but they're also taking a lot of money from taxpayers, including Tesla, including SpaceX, Palantir, which Peter Thiel co-founded with Alex Karp. I've done a video about him and Palantir as well. They believe they deserve everything that they get and more. They're still angry, right? They're still angry. It's like too much is not enough.
I try to pay attention. I try to be fair, but I don't automatically assume that they have a slightly golden aura about them. I never feel that way. I don't feel like they're necessarily evil, but I just think they're just people, and I want to pay attention to who they are and what they say. You know, if politics is how power affects people, I was always trying to pay attention to that. I ended up being an early writer for Wired, and they used to joke about, we can't have you in every issue. It can't be the Paulina Borsook magazine. And I ended up doing a lot of profiles of people, and I think that lends you very well to paying attention to what these guys were doing and saying. I mean, it had its own internal logic, but it wasn't logical because, as I've always said, no sector of society has benefited more and suffered less from the government than Silicon Valley. They've got such a chip on their shoulder. They're so angry. They feel so badly done by, and they have no sense of how much the government funded all that research, did everything to make their lives possible and comfortable, yet they're violently anti-government.
It's incredible that it's actually like this. If you go back to the beginnings of the internet, it was a government project, right? It was decided that it could be commercialized, and in a big way. We have Mark Andreessen, who was involved in Netscape Navigator, which really was one of the first internet companies to really take off. That sparked the dot-com boom. And now we've got this AI boom. Is it a bubble? I argue that it is in some of my videos in past, and I'm doing an ongoing series about that. But these guys now, considering the 1990s till now, have immense power. And as she predicted back then, they are really getting into politics. We have David Sachs, who's the AI czar. We have Elon Musk going in there with Peter Thiel backing J.D. Vance. So if something happens to Trump and J.D. Vance takes over, we're going to have Peter Thiel in there. So we have all these guys getting into politics in a big way and taking a certain ideology with them. Now, one thing that was mentioned, not in this interview, but in another video, the next video on Gil's channel, was the fact that the far right and the far left really don't like these people. There's sort of some common ground with the tech billionaires, like the Steve Bannons don't like Elon Musk, and the left, like the socialist kind of left, don't like it either. So there's a lot of people that don't like what's going on, and even questions are being asked in the kind of middle about what's going on here, especially after seeing Elon Musk go in there and try and destroy whole departments and get data and all that stuff that he was criticized for. And of course, he's just doing it for the good of the country, right? Yeah, right. And big money involved as well. As I said, the 275 or more million that was donated for him to do that, and he was basically shadow president. So all this stuff's going on that she predicted in that book that was not popular at the time, but now resurfacing as in, hold on, she was correct about this in a big way.
And anti-government attitudes. In Cyber Selfish, you mentioned seeing a singles ad in the 90s that read, Ayn Rand enthusiast is seeking libertarian-oriented female for great conversation and romance. I am very attractive and bright, high-tech entrepreneur. So there were early signs of this immature libertarian fantasy in the tech world.
Well, just to go with the Ayn Rand, I often feel a lot of them read it like in middle school, but they never outgrew that phase. They seem so paranoid and fearful, like, the jackbooted government thugs were going to come and, I don't know, do what to you.
Well, that is happening. They're very quiet about what ICE is doing. We got literally jackbooted thugs dragging off people in unmarked cars, right? And they're very quiet about that. If you go into the All In podcast, which David Sachs is part of, these guys don't talk about that stuff and they focus on what they can get done. They really don't care. As you said, they're more amoral. They're just in it for what they can get out of it, and they do have more and more power. And as Gil said, this cyber libertarianism, because that's really what it is, that has turned into tech fascism. Silicon Valley was supposedly on the left, and then having moved far right, really, more and more right. And now people like Peter Thiel saying that he doesn't even care about democracy. I don't think Elon Musk does. He talks about caring about humanity in the abstract, but I don't think he really cares about democracy. All these people, these guys just in it for having tech rule things, not necessarily a democratic government at all.
Early cypherpunks were more worried about what government was going to do. Later, people were more aware of what the corporations were going to do, but that was a late dawning realization. Yeah, but when I saw that personal ad, I went, oh my gosh, this is perfect. He's outspokenly said what I think a lot of those guys think. I'm a slightly important high-tech exec, and I'm libertarian, and of course you want to get with this alpha male, because I'm an alpha male.
That reminds me of Elon Musk's first marriage to Justine. I think she said it. She's a writer too. And she was talking about how he said that, I'm the alpha in this relationship. I think that was just after their wedding, and that was kind of notable. This reminds me very much of that. These guys are very much like that, sort of egotistical, and the whole manosphere thing is really all part of that, which she does talk about a bit later, or Gil talks about it.
At the time, I didn't find it so scary. At the time, I found it kind of laughable.
In the book, you described virulent techno-libertarianism as scary and psychologically brittle, and you wrote a paragraph that is probably the best explanation of tech libertarianism or fascism ever written. It bespeaks a lack of human connection and a discomfort with the core of what many of us consider it means to be human. It's an inability to reconcile the demands of being individual with the demands of participating in society, which coincides beautifully with a preference for and a glorification of being the solo commander of one's computer in lieu of any other economically viable behavior. Computers are so much more rule-based, controllable, fixable, and comprehensible than any human will ever be. As many political schools of thought do, these techno-libertarians make a philosophy out of a personality defect.
So this does ring true in terms of really not thinking about people so much or what's good for society, that it's really about what's good for them. They really want to go off on their own. They think that they're above everybody else. There have been different ideas about that. Peter Thiel had this seasteading idea, which has come up in my chat recently, where, they had this idea to go into international waters and live on seasteads, or at least be there to skirt regulation, right? And now it's space. They want to get into space. Bezos and Elon want to get into space. So they're much more interested in that and not being governed, just being this elite above everybody else. It's really egotistical, and it does stem back, way back to when she wrote this book in the 1990s.
A description we are all very familiar with now in the era of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Peter Thiel.
Another thing that crept in, I feel like, with the Netscape IPO and all the money that began to be made in Silicon Valley, is they really bought the Milton Friedman thing of stockholder theory of value. So anything that affects stock price is bad. So therefore, the way they're all kowtowing to Trump now, I don't even know how much of them really like what Trump is doing or believe what he's doing. They just don't want to mess with the shareholder thing. That's it. They're just being amoral, I would say, rather than immoral.
One of the glaring contradictions of tech libertarianism, or I think has morphed into tech fascism, is that so many of these guys hate government and seek to dismantle it, yet most of their fortunes are built upon public infrastructure and government contracts and subsidies. As you said earlier, so many of these men come from extreme privilege, and yet they are extremely angry for some reason, almost as if they're angry that they don't get to arise from some Randian miasma of self-made heroism, but actually had a lot of privileges and were smart enough to make use of them.
They never kind of acknowledged that they were in the right place at the right time as much as anything else. I mean, Bill Gates is like that. If you look at his history, I can't remember the book. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell's book was talking about how, it matters. The context matters, how he was able to go into a computer lab when he was young and from a reasonably wealthy family and privileged. So part of it being in the right place at the right time, taking the opportunity and becoming very wealthy at this explosion of tech combined with favorable government policies along the way, which they would just say is not a part of their success, but it is an ongoing. If we look at SpaceX and Tesla, as I said, and these other companies, they have benefited hugely from government subsidies, government grants, you could say, and SpaceX is definitely like that. People do say that, oh, it's just, Starlink funding that, but it's not. There's so much government money going into that on an ongoing basis, and they see that as their right because they're doing such great things that they must have this money and they deserve this money, and nobody else really can criticize that because they are furthering humanity well into the future. It's really this long-termism. Think about the long term, but don't care about people in the present, humanity in the present, because they're thinking so far ahead that what's happening now, the people now, just doesn't matter.
Sense of government and the public good almost undermines their own personal myth.
Too much is never enough. These people are really impaired as human beings. No matter how much they have, they can't stop grasping. And, and it's not like the robber barons were nice guys either, the 19th century robber barons.
Today, we have this thing called the manosphere, these toxic douchebags with large audiences who preach misogyny and paranoid right-wing politics, often while hawking gold and fake health supplements. And in Cyber Selfish, you described paranoid anti-government rantings and a tech libertarian culture in which the gestalt is of testosterone-poisoned guys with chips on their shoulders and too much time on their hands.
I wish it weren't true. It still is. We could speculate as to why. I certainly think grafting on the Wall Street bro culture sure didn't help. I didn't realize how pervasive the Wall Street mentality, which is shareholder theory of value, and I can do whatever I want and it's fine. I didn't realize there weren't going to be correctives to that. That is one of the things that surprises me.
Yeah, that's interesting. No correction, as in it's gone way too far one way where these guys, and they generally are guys who've got so much power, not just in the financial world and tech, but in politics now, increasingly so during an authoritarian regime. And they are taking advantage of that, right? They really don't care. They want it to be that way. Gil says tech fascism. And it really is looking like that. And talking about the manosphere, if you think about what's happening, those guys like Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan. I've been criticizing Joe Rogan lately. Now, he has these tech billionaires on, never asks them any really difficult questions, just really softball, and it gives them a hot stone massage, as Kyle Kalinske would say if he watches his show. It's a fun one, but it's kind of true. Just, oh, wow, that's crazy. Tell me more, and sucking up to them. I mean, that's what it's become. That's part of the manosphere, and even comedians that are on board there with Joe, and that has gone well into politics. I have this feeling that it won't end well for them after this regime is kind of over. We'll have to see what happens. Let me know what you think. I'd love to know what you think about this. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to put a link at the end of this to Gil's channel, to this video, if you want to see the whole interview. And I really recommend you do that and check out other videos by Gil as well. And thanks everyone for watching this one. As I said, there'll be a link on screen and also a subscribe link if you're not subscribed yet, and you can watch on Spotify. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.